is July. It's the middle of summer. Everyone is surviving. Maybe you're thriving. Hats off to you, if that's you.
Cheers.
Otherwise, you're in the boat with the rest of us. Here we go. A couple things I do want to make sure we cover today. So obviously Amendment 9 was kind of the big wave that happened last week. Was it only a week ago? So we're going to talk through some of the changes there, how it affects people, how it doesn't affect people, because a lot stayed the same. And then we did get some clarity on the really specific question around staggered domain submissions. And then we'll save some time at the end in case you guys have any live questions and you want to ask whatever's been burning on your brain. So with that, kind of how I want to tackle this is talking about the significant changes that came out with Amendment 9. So if you are not aware, hopefully you are because today's the deadline. If you've not yet submitted your signed SF30 acknowledging Amendment 9 and you're between that, you've submitted but you haven't heard yet, you haven't been rejected, you haven't gotten an award, if you're still under evaluation, you do have to acknowledge Amendment 9. I want to foot stomp this because if Amendment 10 comes out or if Amendment 11 comes out, you're going to have to do the same thing. So everybody should kind of understand how the process works now, having done it for Amendment 9. It goes under your business factors. It does not touch your proposal. You're not actually pulling your proposal back when you sign and upload this amendment. It's a totally separate module because there may be additional post-submission amendments that the bidding pool needs to stay on top of and continue to track and acknowledge. So while everything we're talking about today is in the context of Amendment 9, just keep that in mind. If you see Amendment 10, if you see Amendment 11, and those things come out before you get your contract award, you will have a responsibility until you have a contract in hand, and then you'll probably have a different action because oftentimes what they're updating in these amendments are things like it might be reps and certs, it might be FAR clauses, it may be things like that that apply for contract execution as well. So they may be issuing contract modifications if you're a current contract holder that also need to be acknowledged. We talked about this on the last Ask Me Anything. If you're a contract holder on OASIS Plus, your notification is going to come from that CALM address, the one that doesn't say OASIS Plus anywhere in it. And so you will have an action. You'll get that notice from what is it? It's like Calm Systems or something. It's a non-intuitive to me naming convention, but there'll be a notice telling you that you need to sign your mod and accept it so that your contract stays active. Okay, so obviously we got some conformed RFPs. Most of what changed was some language updates to get the RFP caught up with the number of Q&A that have come out over the last six-ish months. So things like anywhere that it used to say FPDS, it might say FPDS and SAM.gov reports now, right? So little things like that. Clarifications, right? They did some renumbering of the CLINs. They didn't really add or take anything out. It's mostly clarifications to address some of those frequently asked questions that kept coming up. The SF30s have a pretty good continuation sheet attached to it that walks you through what the major changes are. So if you really want to dig in, you can do that. And they did post conformed copies of the RFP, so you can see the changes highlighted as you go through those. There was an update to the JP1 related to the unrestricted domain and how they're doing scoring for some of those credit areas. It didn't actually change the scores. Again, it's clarification of what they mean. And then some clarification around individual security clearances in the management and staffing areas of the other domains. So it's not like you used to have 5 cleared staff and now you have to have 10 cleared staff. The thresholds didn't change. It's just the clarification on the scorecard itself changed. Similarly, with the JP3, if you look at the scale threshold section, it's got a few more options now that actually track to the different domains and the bespoke criteria within those. So they've just updated the forms a little bit to be a little bit more tailored to what the scorecards look like and what the credit areas actually are, rather than having sort of larger ranges and you're having to pick like, oh, which one am I? Yeah, it might be a slightly more intuitive to figure out now. With the FPDS sample, FPDS reports, I do want to clarify, they are still accepting those, right? If the contract has ended, but you download an FPDS report before FPDS went to the big database in the sky, then you can still use that report as long as the information on it is accurate, right? Or they gave additional instructions on how to present your SAM report. They also gave instructions on how to run a kind of a contract summary report from FPDS, or sorry, not FPDS, from SAM.gov. And this is where that funding agency ID information can be found. So they have criteria in there where, it has to be visible what fields you selected, but do take a look at that JP2 so that you can see what your report needs to include in the event you've got one of those issues where the contract agency just says Department of Defense, but you know that it was actually funded by the Air Force and you're trying to get credit for that specific funding agency ID. Okay. We talked about the project verification form, the domain and auto-relevant NICS codes. They made a couple of additions to the enterprise services domain only. Everything else is the same, so no other changes there. It's not like it got much broader or much more narrower in aperture in terms of automatic relevance. Only changes were to the enterprise service domain. The cost price template, this is something where they made it more user-friendly by actually unlocking some of the cells that you were supposed to be able to edit before. And I will just, if you've been getting notices, if you're following any of these opportunities and you've been getting notices that there have been updates, right? So there's one that came out probably an hour ago, maybe 2 hours ago this morning. Probably the best way I can say this is sometimes they're just replacing the attachments, right? They may be deleting old attachments. I know that they posted a new JP9 to the woman-owned and the hub zone, and I think probably some of the other socioeconomic small business ones this morning, because I think they were still having trouble with people actually being able to edit the cells, sorry. So you won't see any changes in the upfront text on the SAM.gov notice, but if you scroll down to the attachment section, you can see that some things were deleted, and there is a new JP9 that's posted there that has today's date. So it'll say 7.15.2026 is where, that's where we're at now. Yeah. Yeah. And then for the lateral springboard summary sheet, they just added some additional clarification that lateral springboards do not apply to the unrestricted domain. Remember, lateral springboards are just if you qualified as, for example, a small business, and since the time of getting that small business award, you've also become a woman-owned small business, or you've become a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. You can spring between the different socioeconomic categories, but you can't go large to small or small to large. That's not what a lateral move is. That would be a vertical move, I guess, as we're structuring this out. And then they did make a couple updates to the actual, some contractual attachments, right? So the task order clause and provision matrix, the required provisions and clauses, and then some transactional data reporting requirements. So those really come into play post-execution, or in execution rather, so post-submission, in execution, after award. But they're good things to know about now so that you can be prepared to execute and be in compliance with your contract for the life of the base period and all that. Any questions on that? Okay. We get this question a lot, and it has been super confusing. So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about an SF30 versus the SF33, because what you might need to submit might vary based on what you're doing, right? So the way that I think about it, and this text, by the way, is taken from the updates. So they have these are GSA's words that I am repeating back to you, but trying to distill in a more understandable way for a quick reference. So if you are submitting a new proposal, you're new to OASIS Plus, you're bidding on a new IDIQ, you need an SF33. They have posted new SF33s, but what's confusing about them for a lot of people is it still has a 2023 date, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But basically the rule is if you're sending in a new proposal, you need an SF33. If you're acknowledging something, or if you already have a proposal that's in, right, and it's a modification, you just need the SF30. So you don't have to do both. If you remember back from phase 1, we had to have our SF33, and then we had to have the SF30 for every little amendment that they issued up until submission. We're not doing that, right? Right now, they have said you just need to have the SF33, and it needs to acknowledge the amendment that it's current as of. And what we mean by that is, I'll show you the next slide here. And this comes from the Q&A. Just remember that this Q&A was released before Amendment 9 came out, so it says Amendment 8, but really for our purposes, we know they mean Amendment 9. You do have to put the amendment in block 14 of your SF33. So you should be saying, yes, here's my SF33 for my new offer that I am giving you. I'm acknowledging everything up through Amendment 9 that was dated July 7th, 2026. If you worked with us and you've already submitted, then you know we told you to put Amendment 8 there. But you do still have to sign and update this if it's a new offer. Once it goes in, you don't have to touch an SF33 again. You just need the SF30. Hopefully that's clear. But I did want to point this out because this is not something that I've seen explicitly called out in the RFP around acknowledging the amendment itself on the SF33. But a lot of people asked, right? Because obviously there's not 9 spaces on this sheet. So they were saying, hey, do I need to do all the SF30s that go along with it? And the answer is no. You just need the SF33 if you're submitting a new bid. Once your bid goes in, you can switch over to the SF30 side. So if you're waiting for an award, use the SF30. If you're a new bidder, use the SF33. Any questions on that? Okay. This is something I'm going to try to explain this in a way that's not more confusing than it needs to be. We'll see. We asked a question because we talked to a lot of clients, and maybe you were thinking, hey, my M&A domain is ready to go, but I have a project that's not quite eligible yet. So I'll submit my M&A domain, and then in 2 months' time, when T&E is ready, I'll submit that one separately. You can't do that, as it turns out. What we learned from talking to the Apex help desk actually is another shout out for those guys and their responsiveness. When you submit, even if you've only filled out one domain, it sends in all of the domains. So you can't say, hey, GSA, please just evaluate me for, I've started logistics, but I don't want you to look at logistics. I want you to look at facilities and M&A. You can't select that or opt in or opt out of domains. Your whole submission goes in. And what that means is that if you want to add a domain, you have to wait until they have evaluated your contract. So if you go in to modify your submission, you're effectively pulling it back, resetting the submission date, and invalidating everything that you sent in prior. The one caveat is if you go in and do a modification before your evaluation starts. I don't see in Symphony where you can tell if it's under evaluation or if it's submitted, right? It's not like there's a third category that shows up. So you have you basically have the option to modify your submission after you send it in, but there's no way to tell if they're already grading it. So you run the risk, if you add a domain after you submitted, you run the risk of resetting your whole timeline and basically invalidating that entire first look. So if you're in a situation where you have a project that's expiring and you have another domain where a project is maybe not quite eligible yet, if you want to know for your specific situation what you should do, we're happy to jump on a call. But it is important to know that it's not going to be okay, well, I can send this one in now, and then 2 months later, I can send the other one in. You might be able to get away with that if they grade your first one in time. But if you've been monitoring the timelines around this, right, we're in July now. This thing came out January 13th, and we have seen a few awards trickle out, but it has not been a big rush, right? So I don't know for your specific company if it's going to be a 60-day evaluation. I don't know if it's going to be a 6-month evaluation. And somebody asked that specific question, right? I think I have that on the next slide. Like, how long after my submission should we expect to hear back? And they basically said, we'll tell you when we feel like telling you. That's at our discretion. So it's not a helpful answer for timeline planning at all, right? So there may be certain circumstances in which it makes sense to go ahead and get your bid on the record and get that part evaluated. And, if you have runway for the other domains to pause on those, it might make sense to hold altogether if it's really not a domain that you're going to be doing work in. Like, the strategy that you adopt is going to vary based on your specific bidding situation, but we did just want you to be aware that you really can't do a staggered submission without there being some potentially unintended consequences. So if you have any questions about that, happy to take a pause and go through it. And then the only other thing that I wanted to mention today, obviously, if you are doing business in and around Department of War, you probably saw the announcement earlier this week that they have paused CMC. It was supposed to go into effect, I think, on November 10th. And they said, yeah, we're going to take a beat on that. So CMC or CMMC Level 2 is a credit area on the scorecard. I don't think that GSA is going to take that information and radically overhaul the scorecard and, make it not worth points anymore or worth points, or I don't think they're going to do anything with it because it was never a standalone credit area. They looped it in with other systems and certifications, right? So like CMMI or the ISO certs, and none of those are required, right? If you look at the language of the RFP, those are all potential scoring areas, but none of them are must have in order to participate. They were talking about doing that at the task order level, but it was never a requirement for the IDIQ. And I'm using requirement in the strictest sense of the word here. But that's why I think it's not going to cause any ripples to the scoring. So it's something that we're monitoring in case I'm wrong. It has been known to happen. And we'll keep you guys updated if that's the case. But I think it's really more akin to when the you used to be able to get credit for things like greenhouse gas certifications and emissions control, right? Those were qualification or not qualification. Those were scoring areas during phase one. And when those certifications got rolled back by the current administration, they didn't invalidate anybody's scores, right? It's not like GSA went back and said, oh, well, now we can't give you credit for that because it's not a thing over here. Like, no, if you had it, you still got credit for it. If you didn't, you didn't. Like, it kind of comes out in the wash, I think, is the general approach to that. Where you might see a trickle down effect is at the task order level, with some change in language there around, maybe CMMC level 2 isn't the discriminating factor anymore, or maybe it is. Like, we really have to see what the language ends up being, because cybersecurity is still a priority, right? Like that is something, that is messaging that is coming through loud and clear. We're not trying to relax and make things more open. We're just trying to make the certification process less cumbersome so that more people can achieve it, and actually do what the program's intended to do, which is keeping the right data secure to the right parties. So we're kind of thinking about, go ahead, Kylie.
Well, I don't think that this is like, it's key that this is a pause, because we see on Amendment 9, we've given a little bit more of explanation on, taking credit for self-assessment. And so I think it's exactly what Rebecca is saying, that this is a pause. They're going to come back to the CMMC. It's going to be required eventually. If you're a subcontractor working with primes who are CMMC level 2 certified, you're going to have to meet their level of certification to work with them and share information with them. And so while they're pausing, I think because they maybe don't have the infrastructure set up to do that third-party assessor organization part of it, this isn't going away. So it should still come out on your long-term business development plans, but you may be able to kind of delay it a little bit longer and not need it necessarily for OASIS Plus.
Yeah, I also wouldn't be surprised, because if you read some of the language of that notice, right, like CMMC level 1, still a thing, the NIST compliance, still a thing. And so it might be that they are redefining the process by which to get certified with the whole C3PAO, because they know it costs a lot of money and that there's a lag time. And I did see a hand. So we don't give you microphone privileges, but if you want to pop your question in the chat or the Q&A, we'd love to read it to the crowd. Okay, self-cert is a credit. Yeah, go ahead, Kylie.
Okay, let's talk about some of the language they have, just because I have it up, and I like to plagiarize from the government rather than claiming it as myself. So the way that they talk about the CMMC certification in the RFP is that you have to provide certification based on whatever phase the government is on. And so technically, if the government is on phase 1, self-certification is part of phase 1. When we move into phase 2 is when you need that third-party assessor. In the most recent amendment, they put a note that to obtain credit for a self-assessment, you must provide official documentation confirming that your self-assessment has been accepted or recognized by the government using that Supplier Performance Risk System, so SPRS. And so this is somewhat, I don't know, I think of it like the DCMA and the DCAA audits, and that, or even like maybe your small business registration is a better example of, like, you can say that you're a woman-owned small business and you can self-certify that, but if you are not officially accepted by the woman-owned small business thing and stamped, then your self-certification is for naught. So you can claim credit for self-assessment if you have the SPRS official documentation, while we are still in phase 1, if the DOW decides to unpause CMMC and shift us into phase 2 in November timeframe, then you wouldn't be able to use that as your credit. It would be that CMMC level 2 is the requirement as evaluated by a C3POA or the DoD. I will also caveat that I have not yet had a client successfully do this because it wasn't really a factor during phase 1. So this is kind of a newer credit area for phase 2. So I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical about how they're going to evaluate your self-assessment until we see it successfully done. And so whenever I'm helping somebody do this, I prefer to also have another credit in that section to make sure that you have enough credits on your scorecard, because I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, because if we're thinking through, like, how do you show this, right? How do you show that this has been accepted or recognized by the government? It might show up as, hey, you bid on a contract that required CMMC level 2, and you got the contract and you got, acknowledgement from the government that you were CMC level 2. Maybe you had a POAM to get CMC C3PO certified, but you were not truly fully CMMC level 2. You just had the CMMC level 2 self-assessment. That might be an example of where the government has accepted your thing. But to Kylie's point, I think it's more than just, and I think they clarified this as well, right? It says it's not just having the right score in supplier performance risk system, it's having it accepted by the government. So if you don't have something from the government saying, we acknowledge you are CMMC level 2, I think it's going to be a real sketch credit area.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that
DoD
surge
acceptance
credit, right?
letter or equivalent official proof. And that is where the gray cloudiness of this is. And so I think if you have 37 points and this is your 37th point, we may want to have a conversation about that as your credit, because that may not be the safest, least risky thing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're going to have to provide the certification body, name, certification level, assessment scope. And those aren't things that you do as part of the self-assessment. So there has to be somebody else who's peeked at it, as my 5-year-old would say, who's peeked it and said, yes, you're looking good. Hopefully that gives a little bit more clarification, although maybe it just muddies the water. I don't know. It's a tricky one. So
no, this is we just cast off and everybody's got a little bit of rot, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Yeah. And I will just say, like, we have not worked with anybody yet who has come and been like, everything I have is perfect. I don't need, it's all here. And we've said, wow, you really don't need us, right? And that's not to make ourselves feel important. That's to make you feel better that, like, yeah, this is a pain in the butt to get everything, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And, we're going through it this week where we're helping somebody and they have a subcontract and it cites the PWS and says, we're going to incorporate this by reference. And then, I look at the PWS and it's got a totally different number because the prime copied the wrong thing and made a typo. And we're like, all right, now we got to prove how this thing links to this thing and does this. And that's it's somebody's fault, but it's nobody's fault in the proposal preparation space. There's just a lot of things that a lot of organization that has to happen, and it's in a way that may or may not be what your company already does in terms of configuration management. So if you feel like, gosh, this is really kind of a headache, like, yes, it is. We get it. Like, it's not you, it's everyone. So the good news is, as organized as you can be at the front, it makes the evaluation go a lot smoother on the backside. We do know that to be true, because many folks who we've supported, I don't want to say they breeze through, right? Because there was nobody was breezing through phase 1, but many clients got awards and didn't need to do any clarifications, didn't need any of that. So just the preparation will pay off if you can show that you are organized and make it easy on the evaluators. It's kind of the cardinal rule of proposals anyway, right? You always want to make it easy for the grader. Don't leave them guessing. It's the same precept that applies here, just in a slightly different format. So.
And don't begrudge any of your OASIS prep or finish off and just throw it in the trash afterwards, because what you're creating is these beautiful project files of your past performance that you can use for anything else that you're competing on in the future. So you can come back and use the neatly organized documents that you have now to really make your processes work better for you.
Yeah, 100%. Yep, can pay dividends in other areas as well. So, okay. I don't know if there's any other questions. Well, hang on if you do have any, but otherwise, thanks very much for joining. We'll send these slides out. Make sure you've read through all of Amendment 9 if you haven't gotten there yet. I know it's not the world's most exciting text, but it is part of the due diligence to go through that. If you have any questions, please let us know. You can reach out to us at our OASIS help email address. Goes right to the pros. We'll get you a timely response, or if we feel like we need to jump on a call to fully understand the depth of the sorrow you're experiencing, we'll recommend that as well. So, okay. Thanks, everybody.